I know it's been a while since I made my first video, so I thought it about time that I make a follow-up. So this is going to be a story time of how Dandy Walker has affected my life thus far. I've asked my mom to make a few notes of my medical history, as she was obviously there a lot longer than I was and will be able to remember the details far better than I ever could. So what I'll be sharing is basically my experience. Before I begin, I just briefly want to go into what Dandy Walker actually is and give a few explanations for some of the terms that I may use later on. Dandy Walker syndrome is a rare group of congenital brain malformations. The fundamental abnormalities involve the cerebellum, which controls muscle coordination. The adjacent fourth ventricle is also often affected, which can alter the flow of cerebrospinal fluid, increase intracranial pressure, and lead to multiple other brain function problems. The degree of disability varies, but is typically lifelong. The treatment may involve physical therapy, special education, or surgical placement of a cerebral shunt. In the majority of individuals with Dandy Walker malformation, signs and symptoms caused by the abnormal brain development are present at birth or develop within the first year of life. Some children have a buildup of fluid in the brain called hydrocephalus that may cause an increased head size. Up to half of affected individuals have intellectual disabilities that range from mild to severe, and those with normal intelligence may have learning disabilities. Children with Dandy Walker malformation often have delayed development, particularly a delay in motor skills such as crawling, walking, and coordinating movements. People with Dandy Walker malformation may experience muscle stiffness and partial paralysis of the lower limbs. They may also have seizures. While rare, hearing and vision problems can be a feature of this condition. I should also mention that no two cases of Dandy Walker syndrome are ever the same. So I've been lucky enough that it hasn't affected me as severely as it may have affected someone else. So I can only really give my account of how it has affected me. So I was born in 1989, and when I was born I appeared normal. But fairly soon after birth, my mother realized that something just wasn't right. So she took me to the doctor, and the doctor suggested that I go for an MRI. The MRI scan showed that I had a severe buildup of fluid in the back half of my brain, which was effectively squashing my brain and affecting its ability to work properly. They suggested that I have a shunt put in, and fairly soon after the diagnosis, I went into hospital and had that surgery done. Upon my diagnosis, my mother was told that I would probably never walk, I would probably never talk, and there was a high likelihood I would need round-the-clock care. But my mother refused to accept this and began doing a program called Brain Gym with me, where she would talk to me constantly, telling me what she's doing, and doing a kind of physical therapy with me. Probably thanks to my mother's efforts, I began talking at 9 months, according to my mother, but my motor skills did lag a bit behind. I never really crawled properly. I only shuffled around, and I only really started walking at the age of 2. In this time, I also had to go back to hospital a few times to have revisions done on the shunts. So between the ages of 0 and probably about 4, I went into hospital a few times. In addition to the dandy walker, I also had a hemangioma, which is basically the dilation and bursting of blood vessels, which affected the left side of my face as well as my small intestine. So in addition to having to go into hospital for dandy walker related things, I also regularly had to go into hospital for blood transfusions. Thankfully, the hemangioma had cleared of its own accord by the age of 3, and the swelling had gone down. So that only left a scar on my top lip and my right ear. So probably my earliest memory of having dandy walker syndrome would be from the age of 4. This is when I had to go back into hospital to have yet another shunt put in when the ones they had put in previously had failed. So much of my memories from this year are of doctor's offices and checkups before and after the surgeries. And while my mother tried to make the experience a little less scary, especially the MRI machine, by telling me that the MRI machine was a spaceship, and that every time I would move into the machine, I was jetting off into space. But still, there were many things from the hospital that were quite intimidating for a 4-year-old, such as the drips and just not being able to run around like the other kids. After the surgery, there were the stitches and surgical staples which had to be removed, and I remember the staples in particular were rather uncomfortable to take out. And then there was not being allowed to run around for fear of tearing the stitches, and not being able to swim for fear of infection. And as a 4-year-old, the swimming ban was probably the worst, as I absolutely loved to swim. Throughout my life, my balance has also been affected, and my coordination has always been a little off too. But nevertheless, I learned to ride a bicycle at the age of 5, and between stints in the hospital, I attended school, had friends, went on holiday with my family, just like everybody else. So, in the same vein, I started play school at the age of 3, and then went on to pre-primary school. In South Africa, we call it primary school as opposed to elementary school, and then went on to 1st grade. I attended a mainstream school just like everyone else, and for all intents and purposes, I was a normal child. There was no special treatment, and I wasn't treated any differently from all the other kids, except for the activities that I wasn't allowed to do. Now, these included hanging on the jungle gym. I was allowed on the swings though, and no contact sport. Also no gymnastics, and nothing that could potentially hit my head or my abdomen and affect the working of the shunt. But there were many activities that I could do. So swimming was fine, just no diving. And I took music lessons and dance lessons throughout primary school. And if I can find any photos, I'll insert them. So athletics also would have been fine, but unfortunately it took place in the afternoon sun, and unfortunately this caused a headache quite often. So the headaches were something that I did have to deal with throughout my school career, and they were probably the most challenging part of having dandy walker in school. Now, all the teachers were told that if I said I had a headache, they should believe me and give me paracetamol. And if that didn't work, they were instructed to phone my mother so that she could come pick me up. Thankfully, this only happened a handful of times during school that she actually had to come pick me up. Now, the headaches can be caused by a number of things. These include changes in temperature, so it being too hot, as in the case of afternoon sun, or it being too cold. Also, if I got too hungry, or if any kind of fluctuation in pressure occurred, so high altitudes and also, I suppose you could say, high pressure underwater. So I would never be allowed to go deep sea diving, for instance. Now, the only unfortunate part was that the headaches, coupled with the obvious changes in appearance due to the scars, were enough to garner me a fair amount of bullying. But thankfully I had wonderful friends and they always stuck up for me. And for the most part, my primary school career went past without a glitch. It was in high school that the other effects of Dandy Walker syndrome became more apparent. I attended a mainstream high school just like everyone else, and though I had no problem learning the work and recalling the work, I found during exam time I just wasn't completing the papers, which obviously affected my marks as well as my confidence. Thankfully, I had an absolutely wonderful guidance counselor, and she suggested I go see an educational psychologist. There, they tested my reading speed, my writing speed, and my processing speed, which is the ability of your mind to process information. So, the results found that my reading speed, writing speed, and processing speed were all about half that of my fellow age mates. And the suggestion was made that I be allowed extra time during exams, which would allow me to actually finish the papers. When they tested my typing speed, they found it was twice that of my physical writing speed, and so they suggested that in addition to the extra time, I also be allowed to type my papers as opposed to just writing them. And this made the world of difference, as my marks improved and so did my confidence. But once again, this made me different, as I was always the last to leave the exam venue, and I was obviously writing the exams in a vastly different way to everyone else, which once again got me a bit of bullying. But this time I found my refuge in the library, because though I couldn't read very quickly, I absolutely loved books. At the same time, I decided to join the choir and found that finding my community really also helped to boost my confidence and overcome my shyness. Finally, I graduated, and with not too bad marks, I might add. From there, I went on to enroll in university and earn myself a BA Honours in psychology. My love for biology in high school just made psychology such an obvious choice. After honours, I went on to also do a B-Psych equivalent in psychometry, which is the testing side of psychology. Here again, all exams were written on a laptop and extra time was given for each exam session. This was a bit of a mission, as each exam period I had to submit all the psychologist's notes and all the motivations, so they would actually allow me to have the extra time. And sometimes they took a while coming back to me. But it made it all worth it, as I actually had a fighting chance to get the mark that I deserved. In general, life just continued as normal. I moved out of the house, found love, and adopted 2 cats. And that brings us to the here and now, where I'm 28 years old, I'm newly married, yay, and thinking of starting a family in the next year or two. Now, I have absolutely no idea what having a family entails when one has Dandy Walker syndrome, but that's what I'm on a mission to find out. And I guess I'll take you along on the journey. So thank you for watching, and if you found it interesting, please like and subscribe below, and I guess I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.